About 1600 years ago, St. Augustine wrote the Confessions, which was the story of his youthful descent into sin and his later conversion to Christianity. And Book 2 of the Confessions has a great beginning. I propose now to set down my past wickedness and the carnal corruption of my soul. So you expect sex. But to the disappointment of readers over the centuries, the sin that Augustine talks about isn't carnal at all. It has to do with pears. He and his friends break into an orchard, and they steal some pears, and that was it. They didn't have anything against the person who owned the orchard. They weren't hungry. They threw the pears to pigs. What stunned Augustine and disturbed him was that he seemed to be motivated by a desire just to do wrong. He writes, "If any part of one of those pears passed my lips, it was the sin that gave it flavor. I had no motivation for wickedness except wickedness itself. It was foul and I loved it." Now, psychologists have long been interested in these sort of violent, disruptive, perverse acts and the kinds of people who do them. An example people often give is the Joker from the Batman comics. In Christopher Nolan's film The Dark Knight, Alfred, Batman's butler, describes the Joker by saying, "Some men can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn." And psychologists have thought up a need for chaos scale that gives you a bunch of statements, and how much you agree with them will tell you how much you want to watch the world burn. So just do this quietly in your head. I need chaos around me. It's too boring if nothing is going on. Sometimes I just like destroying beautiful things. Now, a lot of perversity makes the world worse. I wouldn't want an Uber driver who scores high on a need for chaos scale. And I don't want a friend or a colleague either. But sometimes, I'll suggest to you, perversity can be clever, creative, beautiful. And there's some examples from art. There was an illustrious art exhibition in New York City in 1917, and they said, "You can send in anything you want, we'll accept everything." So Marcel Duchamp sent in a urinal, described a fountain, and they rejected it. They said, no, we just accept artwork. But Duchamp insisted it was artwork, and the resulting controversy turned out to be one of the pivotal moments in the history of modern art. Or take comedy. Perversity is part and parcel of comedy. So much of what's funny is when people do things that are irrational or immoral. In the right hands, perversity is such a source of joy. Perversity can also be powerful. Rory Sutherland wrote, "Irrational people are much more powerful than rational people." And he gave two reasons why this is so. The first is their threats are so much more convincing. Suppose I'm in a confrontation with you, and you threaten me, and you're a rational, reasonable person, so I know your threats. Well, I know your threats are going to be normal and proportional and reasonable, but if somebody is hinting here, you're a perverse agent, I have no idea what you're capable of, and you're far more frightening to me. Second reason is, if you're wholly predictable, people learn to hack you. So again, if you're rational, and I have to outsmart you, figure out what you're going to do next, you'll do the rational thing. If you're perverse, you're harder to predict, and so harder to hack. So later on, after describing the incident with the pears, he writes, "I would not have done it by myself. My satisfaction did not lie in the pears, it lay in the crime itself committed in league with a gang of sinners." The social force drove him. And there are other things too. One force that really interests me goes under many names: self-governance, freedom, liberty, agency. Call it autonomy. Call it a desire to be free, to do what you want, free of the constraints of other people, and free also of the constraints of rationality and morality. Call this reactance. And this means it's an unpleasant feeling that emerges when people experience a threat to our loss of their free behaviors. And there's a wealth of laboratory studies looking at reactance. So they test the idea that what you try to do is reestablish the threatened freedom. And so one of the studies, for instance, looks at binge drinking ads and finds that when binge drinking ads are particularly heavy-handed, people often respond by drinking more. No one's going, I'm going to reestablish my freedom. I'm going to do what I want. A lot of our perverse actions are in response to people telling us not to do what we want to do. And it makes us want all the more to do that thing. I think there are two lessons from the study of perversity. One is to appreciate its role in everyday life. The second lesson of perversity has to do with our everyday lives. A lot of perversity is awful. I think the world would be better off without it. But I think we've seen a little bit that perversity could be funny. It could be clever. I think it can make the world a better place. And so I guess I'd suggest that a life with a little bit of perversity in it, a life where sometimes you put your finger into your friend's ice cream, is a life that's a lot more interesting. Thank you.